Checking, 1, 2. My apologies, everybody. Looks like we're 2 minutes late. That's the first time we had that happen. I had to unplug all the audio. Anyway, we're up and running. Let's get her going. Got a 24-hour news cycle. I'm Dana Durnford, also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. And you can call in at 709-589-4406 if you're in Canada or United States. Or you can text me. Atoms for Peace. The A-10 Warthog only shoots dirty bombs. Wrap your mind around it. And then they have you terrified that somebody's going to take nuclear waste from the hospitals, wrap it up in a conventional bomb, and contaminate your communities, right? That's the same nuclear waste, by the way, that they put in humans. And that what comes out of them has to go to a repository for nuclear, like their excrements, because they're so radioactive. And they slaughter them with their radiation in the hospitals worldwide. And you got to sign a piece of paper saying you can do what you want to, mate. Let's cover the news. And so this is meant to downplay Fukushima. This is France 24 and many other major media ran with this story as if it mattered. And they show you pictures of Reactor 3, the fake reactor cover, and the same with Reactor 4 in the background, that they successfully hoodwinked the planet into believing that they got the fuel out of. Between the ages of 17 and 27, we're going to go through a 24-hour cycle, when a huge earthquake triggered a tsunami that caused a disaster. Now, you'll always hear that sentence. No matter where you read about the story, that sentence will be there. Total accident that everybody writes the exact same sentence. No causal relationship between radiation exposure from the disaster and thyroid cancers have been recognized by an expert panel set up by the regional government. And whether such a link exists could become a focal point of the case. So imagine you got multiple nuclear reactors melt down. And medical industry and universities all participated in pretending that there was no adverse side effects whatsoever from radiation, from nuclear meltdowns. But if a terrorist gets hold of anything, it's a threat to your country. And they are the terrorism. We'll cover that. We got a lot to cover. We got a 24-hour news cycle. No causal relationship. So they want you to think about thyroid cancer, but of course, the radiation of any gammas will go to the thyroid, and then the thyroid will convert them into radioactive hormones. And cancer is latent, but you will get cancers of the thyroid, don't get me wrong. But what happens is you have mutated the radiation into radioactive hormones. They are distributed throughout your bodies and your organs and your glands that control all of your functions of your bodies. United Nations. So what's the point of reading the article if they're going to invoke United Nations, a corporation that has now taken over the planet in increments over 70 years? A report published last year concluded the Fukushima nuclear disaster has not directly harmed the health of the local residents a decade after the catastrophe. And so you can count on scumbag France to stab everybody on the planet in the back, that's for sure. A higher rate of thyroid cancer detected among the children exposed to the radiation was likely due to better diagnoses. The UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation concluded Remember that, these statements. The meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi plant was the worst accident since the Chernobyl. So instead of saying the worst nuclear accident in the world, multiple reactors with fuel pools, dwarfs Chernobyl, they use this narrative. And you see that uniformly throughout the entire planet, that particular statement, that phrasing of the narrative. Tens of thousands of residents were ordered to evacuate. It was actually 500,000 people evacuated. They whittled that down now and claimed there was 190,000. Of residents around the Fukushima plant were ordered to evacuate their homes or chose to do so. It was almost 500,000. This show should be How Many Lies Did Nuclear Tell Today? TEPCO spokesman. TEPCO was nationalized. It actually doesn't even exist anymore. Perpetual liars. Every once in a while, really rare, but you'll hear me mention the word TEPCO, nationalized, which means it was taken over by the government because it went bankrupt. We express our heartfelt apologies again for causing trouble and concern to the people in the wider society, because they're so much better than society, including residents of Fukushima Prefecture, due to the accident. So you want to treat Fukushima. First off, the nuclear trolls are over here. Goodbye, nuclear troll. You got to treat Fukushima as if it's a meteorite coming to the planet. And because you can look up and see a meteorite, but you can't see Fukushima. And then the movie took it and turned it into a public relation firm to get rid of my narrative by the looks of it. Subscribe and click the bell. Not that it matters. You won't YouTube, Google, Alphabet, whatever their name is today. Hi to everybody worldwide. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Dana. Smash that like button. We had 35 at the end of the show last night. It's amazing. After over a decade of doing live shows, I actually had 35 thumbs up at the end of my show. I thought that was amazing. I went out and got high by sniffing my exhaust pipe on my car after. Thyroid cancer risk lasts entire life after radiation exposures. So here's some actual truth coming for you. Fukushima thyroid abnormalities in 55% of the girls tested aged 11 to 15. Fukushima girls have 3 times more thyroid tumors over 15 millimeters than boys, and 80% more medium-sized tumors than boys. And in 2001, just 0.8% of children had thyroid tumors. Now it's 36%. Over 35% of young people tested thyroid tumors. And human embryos in the United States were bioaccumulating radiation. So in one study in 2012, because this stuff should take years to show up, but in 2012 they were showing 860,000 excess cancers in Japan compared to any other year, and 13,646 thyroid tumors per out of 40,000. So if you scaled it up, that's 350,000 of a million. Pre-Fukushima was 1 in a million. Taiwan, again, resolutely opposes the lifting of the Japanese food ban. They're the only ones on the planet left. Japan food ban announcement may be soon. So the Taipei Times is obviously a pro-nuclear, pro-industry, pro-Japan newspaper. It's the only printed English newspaper in Taiwan. And they're advocating drop everything, just ship it in, don't worry about it. We got it all under control in Japan. That's sedition. They should be arrested and publicly hung for what they're doing. Said that a decision is possible as soon as tomorrow, which is today. I didn't see that in the cycle. Could nuclear power help BC reach its climate change goal? Simon Fraser University in British Columbia research makes the case. Again, right? And so somebody at a university starts the cycle, and then all the media jumps on the bandwagon and regurgitates whatever narrative it is that they're trying to sell this time. This is a Ponzi scheme in overdrive now, the universities and medias. New research out of shithead Fraser University is suggesting British Columbia may need to look at nuclear power as part of its electricity mix if it aims to meet its goal of net zero carbon by 2050. Of course, net zero, Miles Allen wrote a paper and mentioned the word net zero, and the United Nations seized up on it, and that was the end of everybody's future right there, because the United Nations is a military-industrial complex, right? Oh, and they done the same thing with the father of global warming. And don't forget, where did the carbon footprint come from? That was a large public relation campaign by BP Oil in 2005, designed to blame you for the oil spill. That's where carbon footprint. It was a cover up of what happened to a large company, and they blamed it on the individual, and we can't get rid of it now, right? So it's actually ingrained by the media and United Nations on purpose. And who's the last degenerate scumbag? Is James Hansen. He gave a single testimony in 1988. And we know him as a nuclear apologist, right? He ran the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in Taiwan 2 years ago, $1.3 million cash. And he flew down there when Schellenberg's little Patsy hang down there was on a hunger strike in front of legislation office in Taiwan in order to get pro-nuclear stuff put on a ballot, including importing food from Fukushima. Hansen said NASA, not Hansen, but NASA was 99% confident that carbon was what's causing the ecosystem to become so balanced, but it's not. It's actually radioactive fallout. So the radioactive fallout covers the planet. This is a model from Fukushima. Covered it just a few days. And now we're seeing mass die-offs of all species. And we've done the actual research expeditions. But Hansen's testimony was pivotal, turning point in the history of the global climate change. And that testimony also was the start of the first talks about taxing the shit out of everybody. That's the next story. I smurfed up. Back to this story. Could nuclear power, or did I jump that or something? Yeah, no. It marked the official beginning of the global warming policy debate. But he's the father of climate change, was Hansen. BP Oil was the father of the carbon footprint. And I can't even remember his name now. I have to dig that up and stick it there. Was the father of global warming, and Miles was the father of net zero. So that's important when you look at the rest of this in context. So when they say the words, when they talk about net zero emissions, they're referring to United Nations that stole his narrative, and BP Oil's narrative, and used it to enslave the entire planet. They are gone to war against the planet. Now they're exterminating us with radiation at everywhere we look. You can see my Geiger counter, for instance, never stops. Could nuclear power help BC, back to that story, climate goals? Well, this is absurdness, by the way. It's BC's and Taco Niet, associate professor of professional practice with the program. So the fact that he works for a university, unfortunately, means he's a useful idiot. He'll come out and do whatever it takes for an industry that the university is promoting. There's nothing he won't. He'll kill every student in class if that's what it takes. Renewables such as wind and solar alone won't be able to do the job, he argues, suggesting the province may need to look at nuclear power in the form of small modular reactors. Don't exist, right? You got to develop every facet of technology. You got to get all the kinks out of it. Then you got to build one that works. Then you got to get the kinks out of that before you can start producing them. You're talking 30, 40 years, 50 years down the road. They've been talking about it for 20, 30 years. But renewables can do the job, obviously. This year was 333 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online, according to the International Energy Agency. And that if you pair that up with pumped hydro and compressed air storage, so compressed air storage is just where you dig big mine shafts and pressurize them low pressure up to 120 psi. And pumped hydro is pumping water with excess energy, right? You can solve all your problems. Advocates say the small modular reactors are safer, cheaper, and can be built with a smaller physical footprint. No, like we got tons of land in Canada. We don't give a shit about our footprint. And so this is the same narrative to use for nuclear, right? If you forgot the too cheap to meter part. And of course, these are all fables, what he's trying to convince you. Smaller, cheaper. That's simply not true. It's cheap. If you scale up small modular reactors to the same output as a large reactor, the reason he built the large reactor was the economy of scales. Small modular reactors, they were too expensive. And so the cheapest we seen was $3 billion. And so they give, these are usually people that went to university, were completely dysfunctional. They were fine getting their degree, right? Being told what to do, what to think, blah, 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 what to write down. They were fine being parrots, right? But they're dysfunctional in the real world. Instead of getting a real job and doing something good, they took the easiest route, which was the route of evilness. Not that getting a good job is hard either. They have all the qualities to get even start their own companies and do extraordinary. Instead, they choose to be evil. And this is what we've repeatedly seen over the decade, is just incredible cowardness, is the only way to explain it, of doing anything on their own, right? They're dysfunctional. They stay in university, they get this degree, they get that degree, they get this degree. And the university's like, they can regurgitate almost every sentence in the friggin' book. They're perfect for teaching, right? But they're dysfunctional, which makes them perfect for the nuclear industry. They don't actually have a conscience. No offense to Taco Bell, but look, this model is only 20 days of radioactive fallout. British Columbia got pounded. It got gutted. The whole coastline was gutted of all the species. And whatever creature you want to describe him as, because he's a creature, he also contributed to the United Nations, right? So he's one of those people, right? He's like this woman here trying to convince you that she's on top of a reactor 100 feet above the wreckage of Reactor 4 to your left.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011. leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
Right, and so when you look at this model here, then you have to ask yourself, can nuclear power exist without killing Earth, humans, and the 8 million species? And for some reason, three pro-nuclear idiots voted yes. But the majority of people are not idiots, and they voted correctly. No. I mean, this is not a game. If you let the model run for another 10 days, the rest of the planet disappears. Stupid. Right? And they're missing, right, a part of their brain about empathy or apathy. They don't understand any of that. Neither side of the coin. They're just functional if they're told what to think, when to think, how to think, and then what they should say. They're like the perfect teacher's pets their whole life. And renewables can do the job, and we see it doing the job, and we see it's so cheap that if you took the money and the people and the willpower that they're trying to put into the small modular reactors and put it into pumped hydro, compressed air storage, and other technologies like that, we'd be, this planet would be free of the misery that we're living in right now. It's a horrific, disgusting, despicable cowards. And this really is disturbing. Simon Fraser University study finds no adverse effects on the BC coast from the Fukushima radioactivity. My goodness. They don't hate you, they just despise you with a passion, eh? It's absurd. It's absurd. It's an absurd statement. I'll show you what I mean here. My system decides to. Well, first off, the Pacific Ocean was brutalized, and British Columbia is up right here. And so the radiation followed, you can see it over there, pounded British Columbia. I'd done research expeditions from Vancouver, all the way around Vancouver Island, all the way up to Alaska, year after year after year. Year after year after year. All the way to Alaska, year after year after year. Well, we got the big one up. And what did I find? That all the species are gone. All of them. Everything's gone. It's a complete extinction event. Unequivocal an extinction event. All the species to the left are permanently gone. I mean, my goodness. To say there was absolutely no adverse effects to the coastline. It's a complete extinction event. There's no other way you can describe it or think of it or look at it. Right there, that's an extinction event. So for them to come out and claim that there was no adverse effects on the BC coast, so what's the point of having a university when you do stuff like that? Really, what's the point, right? And so whoever done the study, what should happen to them? Should they lose their degree? Canada's nuclear regulator starts here, and the problem is, there's 1,000 dysfunctional scumbags like him every day that I can't get to. As you'll see tonight, you can barely touch on them. Canada nuclear regulator starts a hearing on the New Brunswick. I get a lot of different little stories about that up today. Well, this story is important because the New Brunswick nuclear power plant is the only one in eastern Canada, and it's in the Bay of Fundy, one of the most amazing ecosystems on the planet with a 50-foot tide exchange every day to whisk away the nuclear emissions when the wind is blowing offshore. But the wind is usually blowing inshore, right? So it's blowing right across New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and all the way up through Canada. And so they have decades of reactor fuel, used fuel in fuel pools, still splitting the atoms. Perpetual radioactive fallout. And this is, of course, they got it on native land. I don't know how the hell they managed to pull that off. There is big regrets. The chief up there says his 15 minutes coming in May will be his time to tell the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission he objects to having a CANDU 6 reactor on the traditional native land. I'm not going to butcher their name and insult these people. The nuclear industry's already done enough of that. If anything goes wrong, his voice trails ways he contemplates the possibility of a nuclear accident. And at least he's speaking out, right? At least he's making the public aware and the community aware and the natives aware that there's an issue here, and so more people starts to pay attention. Part 2 of the licensing hearing starts today. They want to extend the license for 25 years. New Brunswick Power will try to make the case that they have an outstanding record for safety and reliability, and secrecy. And there has never been an industrial accident on site because it's always hemorrhaging radiation. So they just increased the limits to what they call acceptable levels and stop counting when they get to those numbers. All plants are, one just made, the fuel is still splitting the same amount of atoms as you need to power 1 million homes. And you can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle. You can't see it. That's 2 million cancers if you sequester one in each person's muscles, organs, or bones, or animals, or insects, or birds, or whatever. And so imagine how many you got to produce to actually power 1 million homes. Well, in that case, it's like 700,000 or something, but they've had lots of accidents. They had to do lots of updates, and they had lots of unscheduled emergency shutdowns. The reactor is now been used heavily, so it suffers from embrittlement, which means that if you get a really bad storm, you can crack the reactor because it's a pressurized reactor at around 1,000 psi. When she goes pop, she's really going to go boom. Much worse than a car tire blowing up at 35, 40 psi. And the accidental releases, they're talking about is it there? However, the off-site emergency plan does raise the specter of some devastating possibilities, including potential aircraft impact, a credible bomb threat, a hostile takeover of the control room, an active attacker on the nuclear site, and the accidental releases of radioactive materials, which are always hemorrhaging radioactive material from the fuel pools that are still splitting. They have no containment, and the water is boiling off about 120,000 liters a day, and a liter could easily have several trillion atoms of iodine 130, 129, 131, 132, 133s. But then it's going to be loaded with plutonium daughters and uranium daughters and strontium and americium and neptunium daughters. It's going to have absurd amounts that are hemorrhaging from the fuel pools into the open environment. And it's on native land, so that's contaminated. Your Geiger counters are not going to pick that up. He's only going to pick up gamma, right? The chief says he's disturbed by the idea of having radioactive waste stored on site. Well, because nobody seems to appreciate why radioactive waste is bad, is it's still splitting the atom. It's still creating snowstorms of radioactive fallout. Right? It's still creating snowstorms and snowstorms of radioactive fallout. Did I mention push the like button? I can't remember. You can share me on social media sites. Unless you're the Hulk or Spider-Man or something. We're both created by the nuclear industry, right? To brainwash your children and you in increments to the point where you bought them Spider-Man lunch cans and Spider-Man pillowcases and Spider-Man backpacks for schools and for Halloween and everything else. And what they done was they replaced the parents with all these fake heroes, by the way. This is how they took over. They done this in increments to the point now where if you ask a child who his hero is, it ain't going to be mom or dad. Right? They done it to themselves, the kid. And they wonder why the kid don't respect them. Then you got GoPro hero out there. You think putting the word hero on a camera was an accident? How about Guitar Hero? Do you think putting the word hero on the guitar was an accident? No, because you never have that discussion, right? It's not a discussion people have. They're too busy talking about whatever the TV set told them to talk about. So disturbed by the idea of having radioactive waste stored on sites so close to the Bay of Fundy. This is one of the most productive ecosystems in the world. And as a native, who should know any better, right? Dr. Chris Keefer, doctor for nuclear energy. He started up an organization, Doctors for Nuclear Energy. So that's the next person that they talk to. Hopes the Commission will also hear from people who support nuclear power, which is all they want to hear for. He said it has its challenges but remains critical to Canada's effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So he's what I call a player, right? He says solar and wind are still too dependent on the sun actually shining and the wind really blowing, right? This because they refuse to utilize compressed air storage or pumped hydro storage, which is obsolete technology and existed now for 50 plus years functionally. They refuse to acknowledge that that is the solution anywhere on the planet, which I find amazing. So they're not trying to come up with solutions, they're just trying to use nuclear. He supports renewing it for another 25 years because he's doctors for nuclear. He's doctors for nuclear. I'll show you what I mean by that. If that plant is closed, it's going to be replaced by fossil fuels. An emergency medical physician, that's just the scariest statement imaginable. And the founder and his solution to cancer is get radiation, die. And the founder of Doctors for Nuclear Energy and president of Canadians for Nuclear Energy. Not just Doctors for Nuclear, but Canadians for Nuclear Energy. So he looks like a nice, respectable doctor. He's a malpractice expert, I'm sure. At hiding malpractice, I should say. Oh, yes. How do you rebuttal that, I wonder? I can, just give me a minute. Yes, here, almost there. Just let the computer do the search here for us very quick. Let me try it again. And I'll cover the professor from Simon Fraser University at the same time. Maybe I won't. Yeah, I can't want them all. There we go. So he's a nice, respectable looking guy, right? Seems like a normal, everyday guy. He's a doctor, Dan. He's better than you. Doctor convicted of raping daughter for years. Doctor is convicted of patient overdose deaths, loses latest appeal. Doctor convicted of child abuse, still gets $100,000 a year pension. Former doctor convicted of sexually assaulting 4 patients. Doctor convicted of billing fraud. Botched surgery, gets life sentence. California doctor convicted of murder in patients' overdose deaths. Another doctor convicted of paying a man to kill his romantic rival. Another doctor convicted of trading drugs for sex. The stories of 7 doctors convicted of murder. The list goes on, don't it? Doctor convicted of $50 million medical care fraud scheme. They were all respectable people in the communities at the time, by the way. Oxycontin and fentanyl doctors convicted of abusing children. The list keeps going. Dr. Death. And study shows drop in cancer incidences after you close nuclear power plants. He's a real scumbag, eh? That's a real scumbag. He works as a just a local doctor, right? And he's doesn't understand nuclear is nasty genocide machine. It's no big surprise because the hospital is full of these doctors. Dr. Chris Keefer is the founders of Doctor for Nuclear Power and Canadians for Nuclear Power. What a despicable sack of shit that one turned out to be. I'll put him in that list of scumbag doctors for sure. 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs, Doc. Did you know that nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists, you sack of shit? How low doses of radiation causes heart diseases and strokes and Alzheimer's and dementia and autism and Down syndrome and schizophrenia and diabetes and heart problems and liver and lung and respiratory and pituitary, thyroid and adrenaline, the list goes on and on. The child's risk of cancer from radiation, but he knows all of that. That's why he likes murdering people for a living. He said nuclear power is critical to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. First off, that's absurd to suggest. Here's a model of the radioactive fallout. That's what's causing global warming, not greenhouse gas fable. Like your coal plants, your oil plants, your gas plants, they don't make plumes that cover the planet. And they don't make plumes that cover the planet and pulse energy every second. And they don't make plumes that covers the planet and pulses energy every second for millions of years. At 186,000 miles per second, you piece of shit, you. I wish I had more time. But here's nuclear power for you, the best way to look at nuclear power. And because he invokes Indian Point. Keefer provided the Indian Point reactor in New York as an example of shutting down nuclear too soon. Well, let's ask the fish, did they shut down the new Indian Point nuclear power plant too soon? The aging plants have a devastating impact on surrounding fish populations. Environmental analysts in 2 states have found the facilities kill more than 17 billion fish annually in New York and another 9 billion in New Jersey. And at the National Marine Fishery Services found that once through the cooling systems are vacuuming up trillions of newly hatched fish and destroying them in their heat exchangers. This is all the different ways a nuclear power plant kills marine life. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And that there is strong evidence the decline in the fish stocks along the entire northeast Atlantic seaboard is due more to the destruction of the fish, baby fish, than the overfishing of adults by commercial fleets. And that the Indian Point plant on the Hudson River sucks in 2.3 billion gallons of water daily and kills about 2 billion juvenile and mature fish in a year in its screens and its thermal plumes. And that each liter or each glass of water has around 1 billion in salt water, has about 1 billion creatures in it, and 75 to 100 million in each glass is the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain, and that the other 900 million creatures in a typical glass of water, the soup of life, is eggs and larvae and small fries. And so it's not just the big animals, you are destroying the soup of life. At the NRC estimated more than 300 billion baby fish are also killed when they're sucked into the 40-foot wide intake pipe. Good old carbon-free nuclear. Next. Researchers achieved milestone on the path toward fusion energy. I only put these stories in there so we can have a laugh. Not that it's a laugh. If we took all of these people and put them to work solving renewables, we wouldn't be fighting now, would we? Using the world's largest lasers, and if we had doctors that were honest, we wouldn't be dying in mass, would we? Using the world's largest lasers, the researchers coaxed fusion fuel for the first time to heat itself beyond the heat they zapped into it. Okay, so the energy produced was modest, the equivalent of a 9-volt battery, like you use in a smoke detector. And how much did you put in there? About 100 million watts. And you got a 9-volt battery back, did you? How do you know? You sure that wasn't just static electricity? You demonic morons. But the experiment at it's at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Dana. It's built on one of the world's biggest radioactive aquifers in the planet. Doses to the public from tritium released to the atmosphere from the Livermore site. From tritium. Reactors don't make tritium, they make tritium-3H. Of the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, this is a study talking about 1953 to 2005. Gee, I wonder what the dose was to the public over those few decades. Those 5-6 decades. These are lunatics, eh? First off, you can't just release tritium from these nuclear dump sites, is what they really are. They're all Superfund sites, right? Throughout 53 years of operation, an estimated 29,000 terabecquerels of tritium were released to the atmosphere. Originally, there was around 100 kilograms on the planet pre-Fukushima or pre-nuclear industry on this planet. And now it's like absurd. The tritium-3H is different, right? They're not going to tell you about that. The tritium-3H is completely different than natural tritium. In fact, it's what they used in nuclear weapons. To double the capacity of nuclear weapon, they add good old harmless tritium. The tritium dose reconstruction was undertaken to chronicle both the annual dose to the public, and insects and animals and birds and mammals and everything else are immune, are they? For each year of operation, from seven accidental releases, 7 accidents that they admit to. I'm not going to go down it because we got too much to cover, but incredible scum. Democrats, and that's what the theme of nuclear is, right? If you know somebody is an absolute evil, they can get a job at nuclear. For sure, right? They recognize evil right away. Democrats urge Biden to keep pledge to limit nuclear weapons. Well, you can't use them. If you use them, then what? And somebody fires back, then what? Now you got to fire back. Then what? Well, they got to fire back. And then their cronies in NATO or from the United Nations, well, they're going to fire back, depending on who he is firing at. These are idiots. These are actually idiots. They're ready, man. They're like, give me a reason, baby. I'll push the button. They're so brainwashed and jacked up on different vaccines. The campaign also said it would make deterring and responding to nuclear attacks the sole purpose of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, that the current nuclear posture envisions its potential use against a range of threats, including an overwhelming cyber attack. Then they have a contingency plan to use nuclear as a response. Russia's attacking us through the internet. Why not just turn the internet off at that stage? And what are you doing with your sophisticated equipment on the internet anyway? You morons. If it can be hacked and it's on the internet, it'll get hacked, right? There's so many reasons that people do stuff like this. None of them make sense, of course, including an overwhelming cyber attack. That's just pretty disappointing that they're willing to have a nuclear war over a cyber attack. Do you know how easy it is to attack a country and blame it on another country? Hang on. I put together a special little video that tells that story. In less than a minute, and here's Patrick Clausen at the Washington Institute talking to the media, by the way, at a press conference. And he starts off with, like, it's difficult to see how this president can get us to war with Iran. What are you talking about? So then he talks about all the wars in history, recent history, and how we had basically attacked ourselves and blamed it on another entity so we can get to war, so we can get support of the population. It's known as a false flag, and Patrick does a pretty good job. I put pictures in there to really bring home the point.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.
So it would be best if somebody else started the war with Iran? What? Very difficult to see how this president's going to get us to war. So it's best if somebody else starts it. That's despicable. That's the nuclear industry, by the way, on top of that, is right in there. An advocate for restraint in nuclear weapons. And arms control was removed last year from her Pentagon post overseeing the crazies after a campaign against her by the chicken hawks in the Defense Department and in Congress. They're completely out of control, right? Only someone good ends up in a position there and they get rid of them. Good is not allowed to exist. And so the new nuclear modernization plans are expected to cost $1 trillion. And they paid out $2.5 billion in 31 years for radiation victims. And they stole $1 trillion. Meanwhile, allies led by France have lobbied the Biden administration. There could be 7,500 lobbyists phoning you, emailing you, calling you, texting you at the same time. To introduce and I'm not kidding you, that's what AirPac does, right? To introduce a sole purpose policy concern about like 7,500 lobbyists will show up at your office. Nobody else is getting through, right? Until you talk to one of their lobbyists and agree with them. Take the suitcase of money. Which one of you guys got the suitcase of money? Bring it in. He's going to do it. Not kidding you, by the way. It's a big party at the same time. Concerned about the global pressure would bring on them to change their own doctrine. So France was worried that if the Biden administration start pulling away from nuclear, or first strike, or retaliatory first, or instant retaliatory, whatever, France was afraid that they might have to follow suit under pressure. So there's a big incentive, but that's the weapons industry. It's not France, right? It's the nuclear industry. There's around 9,000 different industries, and every one of them are incredible scum. Failure to change the status quo would fuel a Cold War-style arms race with Russia and China, the lobbyists warned. You gotta have a boogeyman, right? So better to have a couple. You got North Korea, but they're not really gonna do nothing. But Russia and China could, but they're not gonna do nothing. They're lazy. They don't want no war with nobody. The planet's dying, right? The last thing they need is a war. They know it. Once you start a war like that, you can't cash checks anymore. Energy storage powered by, this is a sad story. Fucking nuclear, excuse the language, the nuclear industry is going to use pumped hydro storage, Bruce Power, of course, by Ontario Nuclear Assets. So, nuclear power plant using pumped storage, but you can't use pumped storage for wind and solar, but you can only use it for nuclear. Is that right? Where'd you guys pick up that one to, I wonder? You're incredible degenerates. And that's Bruce Power, so they can get $4 billion. Right? It's a money grab. It's the same reason you build an ice wall around Fukushima instead of a real wall. The real wall is simple, no maintenance, plug and play, right? But an ice wall, you need $9 million each year forever. You get $400 million from the government because it's innovative. And you pollute the entire planet because it doesn't work. And so you see the same thing with Bruce Power, where they can get their hands on an extra $4 billion. Really? So why not use compressed air storage? Because you don't want that technology to show up. Goodbye nuclear. And coal and oil and gas. Because renewables can use compressed air storage and pumped hydro, both of them. And so you have all the peak power you ever wanted each day, and you have all the storage you could ever hope for. And it's a turnkey for 50, 60 years with no toxic parts after. Ontario will need investments in vast new energy storage capacities in combination with like clean power from nuclear. So don't mention nothing else. It's always just nuclear. That whole story is Bruce Power obviously wrote the story. And the whole problem is, right, you can't go through every single law like I do. This will also provide a historical opportunity for the region to track more than $4 billion of investments and thousands of scumbag industry jobs. You notice how they're always increasing their jobs and their wages in this industry? Because their children gets the job next, see? Their children get the job next. And it's a perpetual death trap. It's a disease factory wherever these things are set up and within 1,000 miles of them. Being able to store, anybody who lives within 100 miles of a nuclear power plant are in danger. Anybody within 10 miles of it is if they know anything about nuclear, then they're an idiot. And if you don't know nothing about nuclear, they're going to get sick from it. You can't avoid it. The fuel pools are always hemorrhaging radiation. That's the problem with nuclear waste, all types of it. They're still splitting the atoms released into the environment, no containment. It's so evil, it's so insidious that I'm forced to go to war every single day, all day. Being able to store clean baseload energy from nuclear. Nuclear is supposed to be baseload energy. They want that so renewables don't get the $4 billion and use it for storage, right? So they're just going to steal it. Just like the nuclear industry, after Fukushima, 93 days later, lifted all the bans on the food coming to Canada, no checks, and it came from the worst. Fukushima prefecture was banned, and 14 prefectures were banned, not just Fukushima, worldwide in 55 countries, but not Canada. No. Canada was like, ship whatever you want. Just ship it into Canada. We don't care about the Canadians. We're the nuclear industry. We don't give a shit about Canada or ourselves. Just ship it in. You're aware of nuclear. You can do whatever you want. And so they poisoned all the Canadians in increments over the last 10 years. And now the whole system is saturated with radioactive food because Japan couldn't ship it anywhere else. Canada was wide open. What a horrible betrayal. What a horrible thing to do to a planet, let alone Canada. Canada was supposed to be the best country to live in. Now it's the worst country. Being able to store clean baseload energy from nuclear. So they're stealing the $4 billion so the renewable industry can't use it and show how it actually works, right? Chad Richards, monster of the Bruce Power Center for New Nuclear Net Zero Partnership. They started in 2021, right? At the Nuclear Innovation Institute, the NII. Fortunately, there are plenty of made in Ontario solutions to fill our need for energy storage, including some right here in our own region, he said, pointing to the proposed Ontario pump storage project in Meatford, among others, or to store energy generated by low-carbon sources like nuclear. It's not low carbon, it's the most carbon-intensive thing in human history. Every facet of it, from beginning to long past the human experience, is the most carbon-intensive thing in human history. It's despicable. The whole story is just, it's disturbing they wrote a story like that. It shows you this incredible contempt for all species and all humans and Canada. To store energy generated by low carbon like nuclear. So this is obviously meant for a brainwashing orgy. Provides the insurance of clean, calling nuclear clean. We echo the Nuclear Innovations Institute report that highlights the need for new energy storage capacity. Yeah, for renewables, not for nuclear. Why would nuclear need storage capacity? Most of the nuclear power plant's energy is wasted on top of that. TC Energy is committed to helping them so they can steal the money so the renewable industry don't make it work proper, see? And all of Canada And that's $4 billion is a big incentive. There's $4 billion incentives. Meet clean energy goals. We plan to invest $4.3 billion to develop net zero or zero emission pumped hydro storage projects from dirty nuclear. Nuclear power plants got to use 2 oil, gas, or coal plants just to run. Dedicated to them for another 100 years after the power plant breaks down for the decommissioning on top of that. Like the whole story, you need a 5-gallon bucket, vomit bucket alongside you if you actually read it. Examining the important role that energy storage technology will play in electric grids to a net zero future. And I showed you Miles, the father of net zero, earlier. The study makes clear that these technologies operate best in systems with a steady supply of clean baseload electricity like emission-free nuclear power. Nuclear is not emission-free, for God's sakes. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging isotopes, murdering our loved ones and friends and families and children's, and destroying all the species and insects and birds and mammals and animals. You demonic demons. Bruce Power, of course, right? The most heartless company in Canada. Also expresses his support for the report's finding. Yay! Nuclear is green and carbon-free and too cheap to meter. As they align with both the nuclear generation from the site and also with the 2021 launch of Bruce Power, Net Zero. It's where they kill everybody in increments. Both support complementary technologies of nuclear power that will enable a net zero future. Bruce Power nuclear output is the backbone of clean energy. Provides the province with stable, reliable, emission-free, and base load electricity. It's not emission-free. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging trillions and trillions and trillions of isotopes every day and begging the planet to wake up and have a conversation about this cliff you're driving over. I just want to kick the shit out of these people that write this stuff. The people that write these articles, typically they're not going to be the person that put their name on it. It's written from someone in the nuclear industry. You really got to know your stuff to write these stories. And this is one of the things that really haunts me is these heartless, soulless monsters that write this narrative, not the media that publishes it. Because the worldwide media can't possibly all write the exact same narratives, right? It has to be coordinated, see? Pairing clean baseload electricity like Bruce Power, proven energy storage solutions like pump storage and battery technologies. You don't need battery. Battery technology is the last thing you want to use because you can use compressed air technology. You can dig a hole anywhere. And the minute that technology becomes prolific, everything else dies immediately. Tackle climate change. Oh, and give us $4 billion. Thousands of jobs to the region that you got to keep. Like, when you're doing this for a long time and you're covering story after story, news cycles, day after day, you're aggregating it. And over the years, you see all these patterns. And then you can't deny it anymore, the evilness of the nuclear industry. This disconnect that they have for life, all species. The Nuclear Innovation Institute, see, it sounds like a humble, noble enterprise, don't it? They're the farthest thing from humble and the very, 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 very farthest thing from noble. These are degenerate monsters who know exactly the genocide and ecocide and omnicide they're perpetrating, and they revel in it. It is an independent, not-for-profit organization to accelerate the nuclear industry, to accelerate implementation for the nuclear industry. They have lots of these not-for-profit created by them in that framework so they can take over at any given time. That's what the United Nations does, right? The same thing. They're a military-industrial complex, by the way. Go ask North Korea. They burnt down every community with this vicious concoction known as napalm. They killed millions of them, wounded around 10 million. United Nations did. That's one of the first things they done. The Nuclear Innovation Institute, aka not-for-profit, aka group of scum pro-nuclear bags, is to shape a Canadian nuclear industry. So they're a lobbying group, right? Is to shape a Canadian nuclear industry that embraces whatever thinking they come up with, whatever technology they say is good. And new lines of businesses can drive the global shift to low carbon future. So they're like Canada's worst enemy. This is a... Now, we covered these people quite a few times over the years. And they only show up once in a while, but ThorCon, Molten Salt Reactors, to be deployed in Indonesia. Now, what they claim, we'll get to it coming up here. So you're talking about 500 megawatts, half a gigawatt. So two of them is the same as a full-blown nuclear power plant, right? But the whole technology that they're talking about is unproven, is really truly unrealistic, and is scary. A floating ThorCon molten salt reactor. A floating in Indonesia. You know, Indonesia, where they had the massive tsunami in 2004. You remember that? Yeah, that Indonesia. If you want a floating Chernobyl, the developers of the ThorCon thorium molten salt reactor signed an agreement with an impoverished nation. The company said that after testing a full-scale pre-fission test facility, the Phase 1 plan is to build a 500 megawatt ThorCon unit, 2 modulars, to prove the design, to prove it, and then proceed to shipyard construction of further units, provide 3 gigawatts in the country. This is really ambitious. And these are floating reactors, floating Chernobyls waiting for a storm. And Indonesia is getting hit with super typhoons, right? At 200 miles per hour. And put it on a 185 meter long barge built by South Korea. And the completed plant will be towed to a site in Indonesia, ballast to the seabed. So it'll be brought into shallow water and filled up with water to be stable on the seabed, and then connected to the grid. You know, the same seabed that got washed away in 2004 with a spectacular tsunami. It killed over 250,000 people, if I remember correctly, in Indonesia. Now, according to ThorCon, 24 months will be required from start of the construction before each plant will be capable of sending electricity to the grid. So they're saying they can build a full-size nuclear power plant in 2 years and have it have it connected to the grid in 2 years. And they say this allows for scalability of the plants with as many as 10 gigawatts of power able to be produced each year per shipyard or assembly line once production is ramped up. And that the estimated cost of a 1 gigawatt plant, which currently is at around 10 billion, will cost them 1.2 billion. Now, we've heard the similar narratives from the small modular reactors. But that one frightens me. That if they started mass producing with no experience, no history, no legacy of these reactors, so they don't know what happens, how, and you know there's going to be meltdowns. You start mass producing these in an impoverished country. Again, we've been following this story for several years, and every time we see these narratives, it looks more like a Ponzi scheme than anything else, but it's something that I always, when I see it, I pay attention. Saying that they can have a gigawatt reactor up and running, 10 gigawatts out of a shipyard each year, floating reactors. Constructing a nuclear submarine. The first use of submarines' weapons of war was the Turtle. Attempted to blow up a British ship, unfortunately failed. And by 1959, submarines had been developed which could carry nuclear missiles. And attack submarines were developed that could sink enemy ships and other submarines. Does anybody really think they had all of these on the ocean during the USSR times and never used them? They're pretty gullible. Senate feels glow for nuclear power. No pun intended, I suppose. Members of West Virginia's Senate were unanimous in their support Tuesday for a bill to repeal the prohibition on nuclear power. So there was already a bill to prohibit nuclear power, and they overturned it. That's what I mean by the nuclear industry, right? It can't get into the food into a country because certain people there won't change the law. So they get rid of them, they put their players in positions, and they change the law. Within a few years, now the country is being poisoned by food directly from a nuclear meltdown site like they've done here in Canada. What they've done here in Canada is the evilest thing we've seen in history of anywhere on the planet. Right? It dwarfs Pol Pot and Mao because of the way it kills people and children and women and everything else. And on top of that, women are the most vulnerable to radiation. So that's true for animals and insects and birds and mammals too, see? So when you affect their ability to reproduce, you significantly change the population. And when you keep doing it to them in increments over a long period of time, you guarantee the annihilation of all the species. And that's what we have happening at this stage. We are guaranteed to be exterminated now. But we should seek revenge, and we should come up with some solutions so there can be some kind of a future. But we have to be cautious. If the future only includes them, then we have to create a future where even they can't survive. Members of the West Virginia Senate were nearly unanimous in their support Tuesday for a bill to repeal a prohibition on nuclear power. The Senate voted 24-7 for the Senate bill. 7 people stood by the country and said no. Repealing sections of the state code banning the construction of nuclear power plants in West Virginia, the bill now heads to the House of Delegates, which is considering already a similar bill. Blair said he was pleased the bill gained quick support. Said, I'm excited. Another barrier down, said the nuclear lobbyists. They can't ask for anything better than that. They're not going through all this trouble because the nuclear industry might want to build a nuclear plant there someday. They're doing it because the nuclear industry wants to build a nuclear plant there today. And so that's sedition, right? What they're doing. They're doing it for a corporation. They don't have the moral high ground. State law requires potential applicants to detail to the Public Service Commission how it would dispose of the radioactive waste. Well, you can be like Japan, where you just cover the planet in radioactive fallout. Stupid Japan. All this bill does is say we're open to discussion. That's it, said the scumbag. and simply say to the rest of the world, we are open for business. Discussion. Should the technology come to our mountain state? No, you built a big welcome mat. A big welcome mat is what you did. You deceitful, disgusting, despicable human trash. I have no type of cautionary words for nuclear. I think nuclear power has become safe over the last decades, Romano, the murderer, said. My concern is I don't think I received accurate answers in committees when this came before the energy committees, though I was supportive. We've eliminated by this bill the only section that provides any oversight of nuclear power. Let me read that again. We eliminated by this bill the only section that provided any oversight of nuclear power. God bless America, I guess. Even if we have no regulations, the federal government literally has thousands of people when you want to start up a nuclear power plant that involves regulating the construction of it, the building of it. They're the same, by the way. All the way up through and the operations of it and everything else. Senator Robert Karnes and R. Randolph said it's not as though this would be the Wild West of nuclear power with no regulations or oversight whatsoever. We eliminated by the bill the only section that provides any oversight of nuclear power. That tells the story, don't it? The world can't go green and nuclear free, but of course it could. There's 333 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online this year, according to the International Energy Agency. And 300 last year. So 633 nuclear power plants were the renewable energies in the last 24 months. That's a lot more than ThorCon is talking about. The world has learned to stop worrying and love nuclear energy. Oh yeah, stop worrying and love nuclear. The nuclear industry spent the bulk of the past decade in non-literal meltdown. No pun intended again, I'm sure. And then to invoke the Fukushima disaster triggered a global backlash against evil atomic energy. And in its wake, scumbag Japan suspended nearly its entire nuclear fleet, but none of those employees went to work at Fukushima, surprisingly. Germany opted to phase out its nuclear plants, and various other nations either halted, delayed, cancelled planned expansions. Who needs the hassle of a radioactive waste when building out renewables faster and cheaper? But over the past couple of years, nuclear has acquired a new glow. See, that's not smart or witty. That's actually evil to write something like that. Everybody got a glow. You don't glow in the dark. You pulse energy every second, like my Geiger counter. In 2021, Congress invested more than $8 billion in subsidizing existing nuclear plants last year and bankrolling advanced nuclear demonstration projects, while private investors poured billions into the nuclear energy startups like TerraPower and X-Energy have plans pending before the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So just imagine if we took all this energy that they're expelling in money, monetary, and equipment and precious metals and precious resources that they located to this industry and put it into pumped hydro and compressed air storage, geothermal, tidal wave technology, energy production technology, and storage like compressed air storage and pumped hydro storage for renewables, they would be free right now of this nonsense, right? But they want to develop the technology for nuclear in increments over the next couple of decades, and then have that as the only energy on the planet. When that's self-centered, that's making sure you destroy the country, making sure there is no future for anybody. It's the coward's way. It's the chicken neck way. chicken neck. Meanwhile, the European Commission recently leaked plans to formally declare nuclear energy a green investment. They pulled back on that today, though, right? The primary reason for nuclear rebounding support is simple. It's probably impossible for the world to meet its emission reduction targets. Yeah, it is. It's impossible. And it's impossible because Fukushima is the reason we have climate change accelerating. And you can go back 10 years and you'll see the beginning of this acceleration. You'll see the mass die-offs accelerate or become a phenomenon, then accelerate. And if you let the model run for another 10 days, it covers the rest of the planet. That's just a 20-day model of radioactive fallout from Fukushima. Pulsing energy, invisible clouds circling the entire planet, pulsing the speed of light. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or touch it or feel it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. EU bank may refrain from bestowing green label on gas and nuclear projects. And look at the picture they used. Ew! Nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. That is disgusting. That's despicable. So everybody eats the stuff from the farm is going to get sick and die. The complexity of proposed rules covering natural gas risks leaves investors drowsy and could open the door for potential greenwashing. No, it's greenwashing. The idea of the taxonomy for a banking institution that needs to borrow 60 to 100 billion euros per year on the capital market is to assure the investors that they get what the label says. If we lose the trust of the investors by selling something as a green project that turns out to be the opposite, then we cut the feet on which we are standing when it comes to financing the activities of the bank. So I don't want to see the word taxonomy misunderstood or even discredited. Too late for that. They are already done by invoking nuclear in the first place. Nuclear testing downwinders speaks about histories and fears. Yeah, it's really something what they've done to the so-called downwinders, the radioactive fallout victims. Growing up in Utah, her class would sometimes trek outside to erode trees. Teacher would tell them the kids, they were about to watch history in the making, the teacher would tell them. The kids would then steer as an orange shroud spread across the sky. And I remember the clouds coming over our town and writing our names in the radioactive dust. My goodness, eh? That is the most amazing statement imaginable. The dust had traveled around 200 miles all the way from what is now called the Nevada National Security Site, where scientists once, you got to realize how much radiation they'd spread this way. It was shocking. Fallout from the nuclear test and radioactive particles were swept into the atmosphere, fell back down to Earth, found their way into crops, livestock, where radioactivity humans took on when they consume milk, meat, and products. Inside the body, the thyroid glands will absorb iodine-131, which eventually decays to produce radiation and cause thyroid cancers and other problems. But see, it doesn't, and that's the confusion again, right? Where you hear thyroid and thyroid cancer. But the thyroid makes hormones for your body. And so a lot of the radiation is turned into radioactive hormones. And if you radiate the thyroid, all your hormones are radioactive. And that's it for that's all she wrote for you. People such as Walsh, who live downwind, the wind blows different directions, of nuclear development, open air explosions, because it used to be downriver, see, like the Hanford and the Susquehanna rivers and Indian Point, places like that. So they got rid of the word downriver and used the word downwinders, as if the wind only blows one direction. A very, really deceptive and deceitful and dishonest practice. But it is what it is. And most people don't ask the question of why did he call them downwinders. You can't be downwinders. We're not downwinders. Are you a downwinder in your community? The wind blows every direction, right? Everybody's a downwinder everywhere. People like Walsh, who live downwind of nuclear development, open-air explosions, are now called downwinders. Nobody knows why. And Mary Dixon, another downwinder, told Sorensen and one of his colleagues she thought the attitude towards those in Utah who were affected by the nuclear testing was, there were Mormons, and cowboys and Indians, so who cares? In fact, that's exactly what it was. In general, she added, the tests where they think there are populations that don't matter. And what the United Kingdom done was they went to Australia in the Montebello Maralinga, and they waited for the wind to blow across Australia, and then they set off their nuclear weapons. French done the same thing to the French Polynesians and to Nigeria and to the Algerians. And when they could, they went out and destroyed all the beautiful oases on the oceans, all the paradises like Christmas Island and Bikini Island and the atolls. There's this incredible contempt for all species, and it's not an accident. Sorensen and his team spoke to both women and dozens of other people for a project called the Downwinders of Utah Archive. In 2011, when Fukushima happened, the Senate unanimously designated January 27th as the National Day of Remembrance for Downwinders, is everybody in the country. Paid a high price for development of the nuclear weapons program for the benefit of the nuclear industry. And when the tests were conducted, no one had done the research necessary to truly calculate what the price would be. Really? So you mean to say to me all of these videos about radioactive fallout shelters from the 60s and 50s are not real? Really? Wanting to understand the potential link between the regional health issues and fallout from nuclear tests, the National Cancer Institute, who I've covered 1,000 times, undertook a study on Americans exposed to iodine-131, the ultimate betrayal, eh? Not uranium or plutonium, which is what the weapons are made of, but one of its byproducts, iodine-131, but the biggest byproduct is the curium. And need lead shieldings 20 times thicker for the curium isotopes you do for the plutonium isotopes. And iodine-131, of course, people who don't know any better say, it's got an 8-day half-life. And they're, okay, don't worry about it. It's gone in 8 days. That's a long time ago. Iodine-131 is a bad one. Don't get me wrong. But it's actually used as a tracer. And then uranium plutonium goes with it. And they do a mathematical extrapolations to correspond with what they're able to find is only a fraction of what was there and is everywhere else, right? So they've got 1,000 ways to water down the results, and they're quite good at it. The results were released in 1997, a report entitled Estimated Exposures and Thyroid Doses Received. Thyroid doses received. Well, the problem with that equation is that the thyroid mutates the hormones, because that's what it makes the hormones, but it also makes all the hormones for your pituitary gland, which regulates stress and lactation for the female species and for women in the human species. But it's an important gland, an incredibly important gland for all kinds of functions. And so this is applicable to insects and animals, mammals, and birds in particular, and humans. And so they're ignoring that. They're not being upfront about it, or I don't know how they got in the dark on this stuff. So he and his team used their maps to pinpoint hot spots in the beehive state, advertising in heavily dosed places like St. George Cedar City. They asked people to come to the local library and share their experiences. We came back with 30 plus interviews. And so web visitors to his archive can survey the iodine fallout maps. So I went over there. This is one of the fallout maps. But they're only talking about iodine. They're not talking about all the other long-lived fission products. And they're not acknowledging that you should think about them. It was 1958. And this is 1961 and 1992 fallout. Iodine 131 fallout map for Utah. So the whole county covered, all counties covered. Ground disposition levels related to all tests produced off-site atmospheric fallout. Again, you got to multiply it by 600 to include all the other isotopes. Alongside the interview, Sorensen collected data and analysts, web visitors to his archives can survey those maps. At that link right there where it says iodine fallout maps, if you click on that, you can go see the maps I showed you. In particular, he cited the tests in the Operation Upshot Knothole, later nicknamed Dirty Harry because it generated more fallout than any other continental boom. And a lot of it ended up near St. George's. Also, no single illness can be conclusively tied to a test site cause. Investigations by, again, United Nations. And like trusting United Nations is, it's easier to trust Ted Bundy or Jack the Ripper or somebody. You're going to have more luck. United Nations is nobody's friend, man. Among others, have established links between radiation exposure and cancer occurrences. And first off, like, I can pound this alleged unknown into the ground with the fact that, you know, we have endless documentation of radiation causing harm to humans and animals and everything else. Just there's endless amount of information available, and they're claiming it doesn't exist. There's very skeptics, see? And they created a calculator that lets you figure out your own dose. So it's typical. This is like SafeCast in Japan, right? It's watered down by 1 million times. Since 1990, the government has offered some compensation to downwinders and others affected by the nuclear testing through the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA, which sunsets this summer unless a bill is passed to renew it or expand it. And RECA pays downwinders, test participants and uranium workers from $50,000 to $100,000 if they have specific ailments and can prove with decade-old evidence that's hard to come by they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, they were in the right place. The nuclear industry came along and poisoned them and never told them or warned them. The reporting was supported by the International Women's Media Foundation, Howard G. Buffett Fund for Women Journalists. And so if you have a non-profit group, the industry will take over the group when you die. And your legacy will never live on. It'll be used, it'll be weaponized right away. And good people will never see a nickel of that money, ever. UK injects cash to keep Sizewell nuclear plant moving forward. Yeah, because this is the picture that they typically show you, right? But here's the actual picture. And so you can see below, that's a model of Sizewell C in the United Kingdom. And it's going to be a monster. Not only that, it's surrounded by farms as far as you can see. That's all farmland. Now, why would you put a nuclear power plant in farmland? The fuel pools are going to hemorrhage radiation all day. Everything's going to be contaminated all the time. It's okay, Dana. They're going to ship that out. Grow new food there. Is that how you keep the radiation background levels down around your plants? You put them in farmers' prime farmland? Yup. They hate you. Like, you can deny what I'm showing you all you want, but you're wrong. You can say I'm wrong. I'm not wrong. Like, do you really think I'm making this up? Do you really think that nuclear power plant fuel pools are not hemorrhaging, are not splitting the atom? You really think the atoms just stay there? Oh no, we can't go. There's farms out there. They're going to make sure they murder everything. That's what that's all about. All nuclear power plants, not all, but 99% of them, are surrounded by farms. Right up to the nuclear power plant. And if you go there and stand up and take a picture, there's a whole bunch of high school boys with a permit to carry a weapon are going to come up and confront you, and they're trigger happy as they get. It's not unusual for them to shoot somebody. Oh, I had a brown paper bag. I was in fear for my life. U.S. lab sparks nuclear fusion. What will it take to make it last? These are crazy stories. Nuclear fusion. Like, you got thousands of top-notch physicists working on this. And these are the kids of the nuclear demons, right? And they get these cushy little jobs because they know there's not going to solve it. There's no incentive to solve it. These are kids who grew up with everything thrown at them and are coasting through life, right? They put them to work on this because they're smart. And they're not going to solve that, but they don't want them solving other stuff, right? With 192 lasers and temperatures 3 times hotter than the center of the sun, they hit it at least for a fraction of a second. Think about, remember that statement there, for a fraction of a second. Fraction of a second. It's actually a trillionth of a second. A key milestone on a long road towards nearly pollution-free fusion energy. In order to create the pollution-free nuclear energy, they got to pollute the whole entire planet for 100 years first to get the kinks out of it. And when no life can live on the planet anymore, then they'll crack it. Caroline, a University of Michigan experimental plasma physicist, who wasn't part of the research, by the way, said it's basically limitless. Clean energy can be deployed anywhere. That doesn't exist and might never. Forgot that line, didn't you, Caroline? Kooky. What a kooky statement. Oh, it's basically limitless. Clean energy can be deployed anywhere. If it actually exists someday. Don't hold your breath. Researchers around the world have been working on the technology for decades. They're not researchers. They're working on a 1900s paper that was written by a guy in the early 1905 or something, 1906. He wrote a paper about this, and that's what they're using to try to crack it, because they can't come up with something on their own, right? So they've gone all the way back over 100 years to a paper, and that's their model, because they can't think of shit on their own. 35 countries collaborating on a project in scumbag France. 35 countries. So if you took all that manpower and energy and willpower and applied it to renewables and storage, problem solved, right? Get on with the future. They're not going to do that, though. They'll waste. They'll use all the other smart guys will go to work on small modular reactors. The planet will fall apart and die, and then they're like, we got it! What? Hello, is anybody left? Omar Hurricane. Great name, Omar. A hurricane, really? Chief scientist for Lawrence Livermore. I should have known. Fusion program. We're a long way from useful energy, maybe decades. long after I retire, so who gives a shit, he said. These experiments created burning plasmas that lasted a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. And that was enough to be considered a success. That was enough to be considered a success. So you're talking about static electricity. You hit it with 100 million watts of electricity. Don't try wrapping your mind around because it's actually impossible. 100 million watts of electricity, and then they were able to extrapolate in a trillionth of a second that they had some success. They were up, gone in for pizzas and champagne right after, Dana. Usually when I read stories like this, I go run my head into a wall a couple times so I can forget it. Oh, my head hurts. What was that story? I can't remember. It lasted 100 trillionth of a second. A trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. It lasted 100 trillionth of a second. How was they get home and their wife or their husband is like, honey, how was your day? It was wonderful. We had success. Really, honey? What happened? Well, we had energy lasted 100 trillionth of a second. Which is like when you blink your eye, you can blink your eye like 30,000 times each time that you blink. Instead of blinking once, imagine blinking your eye 30,000 times. And they extrapolated that out as a win. Yeah. Well, in the studio here, the walls are actually covered in big rubber padding, so it's no good for me to get up and run my head into a wall right now. But normally that's what I would do when I read these stories in the day. It took me 10 hours to put this together today. The major problem with fusion is that it's hard. Wow. Thanks a lot there, Dr. Cowley. Otherwise, it might be the perfect way to make energy. Sustainable, plentiful, safe, minimal environmental impact. Well, how would you know? You ain't got one. An environmental impact that you left behind so far, over 50 years of trying, is massive. It's massive. They used up all the precious metals that they can get their fucking hands on now for 50 years. Excuse the language. Story was reported by the scumbag Associate Press. The AP Health and Science Department received support from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Department of Science Education. You know who Howard Hughes was? Famous actor, right? So they stole that money, going to burn it up on fusion, eh? That's the problem when you leave a bunch of money in a foundation. The foundation immediately gobbled up by the industry, and all that money now is going to be used for evilness to destroy the country. And I work like a dog to do something good. Basically bankrupt at this stage. None of them are going to support me. Thank goodness there's a couple of people out there that contribute a little bit here and there. It keeps the operation kind of moving. Without that, it's just me here battling on my own. And it's a tough gig, eh? Being honest is it's a terrible job, apparently. Nobody wants it. I'm the only one foolish enough to take it. Sweden approves nuclear waste site to keep its reactors running. What do you want to do? What are we going to? We're going to put it in the ground in a big hole. Okay, do it. That means we're going to get nuclear up and running. Keep it running. Yeah. Okay, put it in a hole in the ground. Shut up. Don't tell anybody. Do like the pirates used to do. Just stick an old ore in the ground upside down to mark the spot and run away. I agree, right? Do something. Because it's still splitting the atom. There's no future for anybody on the planet. As long as this stuff is splitting the atom into the atmosphere, we're all doomed. Sweden approves nuclear waste site to keep its reactors running. will store spent fuel at least 100,000 years, which is not, that's one half-life. And so a half-life is supposed to be a half-life, right? Wrong. It's nuclear. There's 10 of them. Only neighboring Finland so far has a permanent storage site. Finland doesn't have a permanent storage site. They're digging a hole in the ground. They just said to hell with it, and they're going to go do it. We don't care. Sweden just said, frig it. Because if they don't come up with a solution by 2025, they're going to have to shut down their nuclear power, is what they said. So let's put it in a big hole in the ground. Sweden is set to build a repository. These are not repositories. These are dumps. Call it what it is, you coward. For the permanent disposal. See, if you took 1,000 universities and said come up with a solution, they'd come up with a solution. But if you took 1,000 universities that are full of pro-nuclear scum, which they all are because they've all been captured, you're not going to come up with a solution. The whole story of coming up with a solution is madness. They don't want to come up with a solution. They want it, obviously, hemorrhaging into the environment, splitting the atom all day long from all the nuclear fuel pools and dumps. Because they could have dug a hole in the ground, put it there a long time ago, couldn't they? Proposition of Deep Geological Repository Site about 150 kilometers north of Stockholm has been approved by the government. Whoever was in power at the time is the government, right? Whoever was paying attention got the job, which is the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry gets the job and they're like, yeah, I put it in the hole in the ground. Is there a better solution? No. Will there be a better solution? Don't care. Dig a hole. I don't care what you does with it. Stick it up in your hole in the ground if you wanted to. Get it off the surface. Stop splitting the atom. You got to come up with some solution. You should be able to retrieve it, not to make mixed oxide fuel, but so you can blast it towards the sun in the future. The facility is expected to be completed in about 10 years. Then they can start loading it. That takes 40, 50 years. The nuclear industry, which warned last year the lack of storage space will force most of Sweden's reactors to halt by 2025, in 3 years' time. So Finland's approved the same method in 2015, plans to have its site in the middle of the decade by 2050. So digging a hole in the ground to put the radiation is still, like Canada has been at it since 2002. And they expect it'll take 40 years to get it underground once they find this site and builds it. And they expect to take 20 years more to build it, to dig a hole in the ground. Nuclear power renewable. Look, all they're worried about is, can we put enough atoms in the environment to guarantee the extermination of all species? And they succeeded already with Fukushima. Nuclear power, renewable energy is both associated with national decarbonization, but it's not. You can't decarbonize. It's not going to solve your problem. The problem is not carbon. The problem is radioactive fallout. Invisible clouds covering the entire planet. Coal, oil, and gas emissions don't do that. Pulsing energy at the speed of light. You can see it on my Geiger counter up there. Pulsing energy every second at the speed of light. Killing everything with replicating cells. That's nuclear for you, baby. France looking at using more winter coal as nuclear output legs. France is disgusting. Westinghouse announces next generation nuclear fuel enhancement. Now, the media will portray this as fuel that can't melt down or something like this, or accident-proof fuel or something like that. That's not what's going on. It's meant to give you an extra 5 or 10 minutes before it starts to melt down. Maybe 20 minutes. That's all it's about. But right, they make it sound like, we solved it. And it's simply not true. And of course, Westinghouse, these are war criminals. They should be arrested for crimes against humanity, what they've done with all their nuclear waste into the oceans and landfills In Georgia, a bloated cost takes over a nuclear power plant, and a fight looms over who pays. Georgia. The Vol 2 new nuclear reactors are 6 years late and $16 billion over the original budgets. $16 billion over budget. $16 billion. Oh, the plants will have no direct carbon footprint. No direct carbon footprint. They're the most carbon intensive things in human history. Each plant, each reactor site needs at least 2 cold oil or gas plants to build it, to run it for its lifespan, and for 60 or 100 years to decommission it, dedicated to the site. Fossil fuel plants. Coal is usually the cheapest, right? And then, at 1 million tons of material used here, 800,000 tons of it is going to be radioactive for millions of years. Railway competes Department of Energy. Railcar completes Department of Energy used fuel transport system. Again, the Department of Energy has the lion's den, right? They're the proliferator of nuclear, and they hire their own, and they're the most dysfunctional people you'll ever come across. They're the most disconnected you'll ever come across. And they all carry knives in their socks and their pockets in case one of their cronies tries to kill them. Has issued a request for the proposals for the fabrication and testing of a prototyped 8-axle rail car so you can ship high-level nuclear waste through your communities down to WIP, which is supposed to be a pilot project, a waste isolation pilot project, which is supposed to be a test, right? Imagine stored nuclear canisters down in the salt. They generate heat, which means condensation, which means water. They're only meant to last so many years, but they generate a lot of heat, right? In fact, they're going to be using fans on them for quite a long time, which is what they want to do with Yucca Mountain. They wanted to fill it up with air conditioners, because the volume that you put in the Yucca Mountain, which, by the way, went through $20 billion worth of litigation, not counting everything else, they spent $20 billion on litigation. Turns out it was built on an earthquake fault line on top of that, because they had an earthquake within 2 kilometers of it or something. And that the criteria for it was how much heat can the mountain hold for 200 years. And so in order to decrease that, they wanted to fill it up with air conditioners. But what happens if you lose the power in a nuclear wasteland? Well, you can't go fix it. So these rail cars are meant to carry a massive amount of radioactive fuel, hot fuel. BN 800 running on 60% mixed oxide fuel. And of course, the World Nuclear News, you know how crazy the World Nuclear News is. They're lobbyists, right? They're in the nuclear industry. Has been given an overhaul after 6 years of operations. The fast reactor, which is a plutonium reactor, a mixed oxide fuel reactor, is using 60% reclaimed uranium and plutonium, which plant owners describe as the fuel of the future, which is illegal in Canada and the United States. It's MOX fuel. Reactor 3 in Japan was MOX fuel. The unit is a sodium-cooled fast reactor, which are the worst. The biggest polluters of all are the fast reactors, because they're creating plutonium in real time, extra plutonium that is reclaimed for fuel. So it starts off with a load of fuel, and it produces endless amount of fuel for other reactors too. And in order to make the fuel, you've got to pollute half the planet. It's such a toxic fuel. In order to get the reclaimed uranium plutonium, you boil the used fuel rods in 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures in acid. the whole process has contaminated the entire, like La Hague in France and Windscale, which is now Sellafield, United Kingdom. They have fuel processing facilities, which are illegal in North America, but they have them down there. They have polluted the entire Atlantic and the Arctic Sea with isotopes from those types of reclamation. Uranium comes from depleted uranium tail left over from the enrichment process. Depleted, there's two types of depleted uranium, believe it or not, right? And yellow cake too, right? There's yellow cake comes from the mountain, but there's yellow cake left over from nuclear production. Perpetual lies, eh? And this is how they create the lie, because you talk about yellow cake, but you don't specify that it's from the chain reaction. Then the industry will come out and bludgeon you and say, oh, you're talking about yellow cake, that's the stuff they use for making the fuel. It's an agenda, and it's a terrible agenda, unfortunately. And this way, MOX uses depleted uranium has no immediate use, not because it's lethal for millions of years. It's held in storage for plutonium, which is named after the devil, recycled from previously used fuel, which is reclaimed uranium plutonium. And the fuel of the future increases the resource based on the nuclear power industry tenfold and makes it virtually waste-free, because your waste now gets used for more fuel rods to power other reactors. But the emissions, so when you take this out and put it in a fuel pool, because that's what you got to do at some point, it become brittle with trillions of little microscopic cracks in it. All of them are hemorrhaging isotopes. You put that into a fuel pool, like, so when you put nuclear fuel, the original nuclear fuel, through a chain reaction, that's when you start this cycle. And the experts have described it as the stuff from the isotopes coming out of used fuel is 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Now, when you put it through a chain reaction again, you double that up. It's 1 billion times again more toxic than when it first went through the chain reaction, and which is 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And so when it gets ingested or inhaled or consumed or assimilated into any living organisms, it immediately attacks it with a bombardment of X-rays and neutrons and emitters pulsing energy at the speed of light. And your body is under siege now, and it produces, and insects, animals, birds, mammals, everything, humans will start producing white blood cells to attack the radiation isotopes in your body. And that goes on for the rest of your life, and your body eventually, after decades, build a tumor around it. But while that is happening, you have all these white blood cells displaces the red blood cells. Red blood cells are carrying oxygen, nutrition throughout your body and the insects' bodies and the mammals and animals and everything else, right? North Korea saber rattling rekindles nuclear test site questions. Like, who cares what North Korea is doing? The United Nations wants them demonized because they couldn't beat them, right, in the 50s? Despite they burnt down every community, every house in every community in the whole country, and has segregated them for 60 years. Renewable energy is overrated. Nuclear fusion is the key to the future, right? Nuclear fusion doesn't exist. You got to develop it. There's an absurd amount of energy, time, commitment, resources, precious metals. But renewable energy is overrated, so don't put any effort into renewables. It's overrated. That's not a cop-out. That's craziness. That's craziness to talk like that, right? EU dispute over sustainable energy is roiling Germany's coalition government. So Germany just shut down 3 reactors at the end of 2021. They have 3 reactors left. They'll be shut down the end of 2022. And the call, because Germany's part of Europe, right? And so it's impossible to call nuclear carbon-free or green or anything else. That's exactly what they've done, though. It's a great picture, isn't it? The protesters. Don't touch our future. Greenwashing. A brewing dispute with the European Union over which energy sources will be classified as sustainable, like nuclear. Nuclear, again, that's greenwashing when you include nuclear. And right, so they got you convinced that gas and oil and coal is causing global warming. But it's 75 years of nuclear emissions into the environment that has caused the global warming. And I'll give you 16 days of what 16 days of emission looks like from nuclear. And that's the Pacific to your left and the Atlantic Ocean to your right. So the whole planet in 16 days is covered in radioactive fallout. That's absurdness. That's simply not acceptable, is it? United Arab Emirates and South Korea plan to jointly bid for nuclear energy projects overseas. Right, so the nuclear companies, like if you, don't matter where you're to, if you had a little tiny island in the middle of Alaska and you said, hey, I wouldn't mind if you build a nuclear reactor, they'd all be bidding on it right away. Yeah, we'll build it for you. We'll get the government to pay for it for you too. Give us location. We'll come up there right away and do it. Finland contracted to advise Lithuania on possible geological repositories. Right? It's a great name, isn't it? Geological repository. Yeah, what does it look like? Well, you dig a big hole in the ground, you put all your nuclear waste down there, and you run away. Oh, like we've been doing for decades. Yeah, that's right. The general criteria to dispose of its used nuclear fuel will be studied. You mean after 75 years you don't know what you're doing? I'm not surprised. Are you surprised? I'm not surprised. 2022 focuses on completing nuclear power projects. It's down to India. Remember, India still has 9,000 people charged with sedition for protesting a nuclear power plant in 2011. They still haven't been to court. They're still not free to have a life. 9,000 people charged with sedition for protesting. Completing construction of two 700 megawatt nuclear power plants. Speeding up other atomic power projects will be the focus in 2022. So you know where India is going, don't you? And not only that, they're talking fast breeder reactors, which makes fuel. It's the worst nightmare come true, really, that anybody's doing that. So that's two different countries we see now with the fast breeder reactor going for it. Investors clash on gas and nuclear muddies the EU green finance. Investors clash. Well, first off, it's absurd to suggest that nuclear is green. So they're not clashing. They're just refusing to go along with the greenwashing. Some say labeling nuclear as a green investment will aid the low-carbon evolution by encouraging financing for facilities to help wean countries off the dirtiest fuel. Yeah, but these reactors are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment, causing global warming. They are the cause of global warming. Why make more of them? Frightening map shows how much of Ireland would be blown up if a nuclear bomb hit 4 major cities. They're going to bomb them too because they won't let them have a nuclear power plant there. So they'll probably bomb them at some point in the future. What the hell did Ireland ever do? An 800 kiloton. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. We take the lives of 340,000 people and injure another 500,000. Yeah, of course it would. Users can check the potential impact of a nuke being detonated in their hometown, including the number of fatalities and injuries it could cause. The website Nuke Map was created by Alex Wellerstein, a historian of nuclear weapons, in a bid to help people visualize nuclear weapons and get a sense of the scale of the bombs. I was over there playing around on it. I'm not going to deny it. I'll probably go back after. I like blowing up Russia personally, but hey, everybody to their own, right? U.S. appreciates Kuwait's support for mutual return to compliance with Iran nuclear deal. So, Kuwait, the highway of death. The highway of death. They used depleted uranium. There was 300,000 of the Ba'ath Party that had invaded Kuwait and stole the banks and the jewelry shops and the car dealerships, all the Ferraris and Maseratis and everything. And we're looted the whole Kuwait, and we're driving away with all the loot piled up, and American military. And this was an interesting time, because they never gave them the weapons until the day of the battle. Because after Vietnam, in Vietnam there was around 10,000 officers that got killed by the enlisted men, were thrown hand grenades into their lunch tents and phosphorus grenades into the latrines where the officers were too, and booby trapping their bunks and stuff like this in their vehicles. Killed over 10,000 of them because of the Agent Orange, right? The soldiers were being sprayed with Agent Orange, and then they were going home, and their children were being born with all kinds of missing limbs and stuff like that. And so when he got to Kuwait in the 90s, they didn't give them ammunition until the day of the war. And Dr. Doug Rourke was tasked by the Pentagon to go in and clean up what they called a highway of death, where they used A-10 Warthogs. Well, what the Ba'ath Party had done was picked up a bunch of homeless people and put them in ditches, dug ditches with the tanks, and put these people down there in the ditches, never even had shoes on to go run away with. The Americans came by with their tanks and had plows on the front of their tanks and plowed into ditches. And so the soldiers were walking behind. The Iraqis arms were still waving from the earth as the soldiers walked past them, suffocating. And then Doug Rourke and the rest of them started losing their teeth and everything and got open sores within 2 days because they had used depleted uranium to slaughter the 300,000 Ba'ath Party that was leaving Kuwait with all the loot, right? And they used depleted uranium on Maseratis and Ferraris and the BMWs and that. So yeah, the Americans say anything. They're like, yeah, we'll do whatever you like, man. Just don't use that depleted uranium again. Ukraine sees no need to review Russia's nuclear doctrine. We had the right to use our country's strategic nuclear forces in response to an attack involving weapons of mass destruction against us or our allies. That's the scariest sentence imaginable. Allies. And in response to any other threat to our country's existence. In other words, so like, look, if you're using nuclear because your country's existence is in jeopardy, you don't have a future now. You just destroyed your future. They'll use more nuclear. Where does it end? Right? Invoking nuclear is not going to save your country. That's suicide. It's a big suicide pill to take out the whole country with. Nuclear Commission fines Oyster Creek owner $50,000 over security violations. And they dropped it down. Well, the security violations was they didn't inspect the guns and the ammo, the security, which is high school graduates who have a license to carry a weapon. That's what they use for security at nuclear sites. And they're supposed to get their ammunition inspected and the guns inspected. And they didn't do it. They got a $150,000 fine, but they appealed it and got a $50,000 fine instead. Sure gives me a lot of confidence. I don't know about you. Overall, the non-regulatory committees found the Oyster Creek security program remains effective. First off, no one's going to go and steal fuel from a nuclear power plant. It's stupid to even suggest it. If you take a fuel rod out of the pool and try to run away with it, it's just absurd. It's just absurd to suggest that somebody's going to do it. And not only that, you need a special truck to steal it. It's a slow, long job. You can actually go home, take a nap, and come back and catch them later. Nuclear disablement team trains for sampling mission at the first area medical laboratories. So their job is to run into a nuclear wasteland and get samples. Talk about shit jobs, man. There's the job nobody wants. Only the stupid takes that job. You gotta be incredibly stupid to take that job. Leaders eye transition to nuclear power boomtown. This is where Bill Gates is going to set up. So the town was flatlining. People were trying to sell their homes, and then they just moved away and left their homes behind. There's no economy there. And Bill Gates now is going to build a nuclear power plant there, right? No. The government, the U.S. government, is going to give Bill Gates the money, and his company is going to build it, and Bill Gates' name is going to be attached to it, rather than come up with solutions, right? How is an obsolete technology that has literally trillions of adverse side effects a solution? But Bill Gates turned out to be an incredible scumbag, just an absolutely planet hater. UK invest $135 million in EDF, which is France. It used to be a Riva, right? A nuclear plant. Riva went bankrupt to get rid of its commitments. Wind turbine prices set to rise because of the prices of precious metals now were incredibly exaggerated. Ah, yes, my favorite one today. North Korea to cheer the UN disarmament forum on nuclear weapons, and the US and EU should walk out. First off, UN burnt down every community in North Korea. So were the kids and the women and children guilty back during that war or something? They isolated them now for over 60 years. There will be no forgiving. Once a grudge, always a grudge. United Nations, the last people North Korea is going to trust. Why would you trust 193 militaries for? How do you get that stupid again? Has announced North Korea will chair the World Disarmament Forum, which negotiated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It took them 50 years to get the signatories, and none of them are nuclear nations. And they show you that picture there. United Nations bombed everything. UN was established after World War II with the aim of preventing future wars. And now it runs the planet. Now it has every arm imaginable, right? It has the IAEA, the World Health Organization, the World Bank, UNICEF, UNSCLEAR, ERPA, the ICPP. It's morphed into nothing but evilness. Was established after World War II with the aim of preventing future wars. And we've had nothing but wars since. And with the the backings rather, of this despicable group known as United Nations. Multitude of specialized agencies, funds, and programs like the World Bank Group, the World Health Organization, the World Food Program, UNESCO, UNICEF, all agents of evil. The Security Council resolution on 7 July 1950 authorized a U.S.-led coalition to repeal the North Korean invasion of South Korea. Like, do you really think South Korea wasn't creating all kinds of atrocities? The South Korean police lined up tens of thousands of people and executed them publicly for being sympathizers, alleged sympathizers of North Korea. The whole story is just frightening that something like this existed. Conference on Disarmament to hold first public plenary of its 2022 session on Tuesday, which is long gone, right? And this is United Nations, again, in Geneva. Warning, no trespassing. Security will shoot you on sight. For the second time in many months, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has fined the owners of a former New Jersey nuclear power plant for security-related violations because they didn't get their guns and the high school employees inspected. That'll teach you. We got a poll tonight. How are we doing up here? Can nuclear power plants exist without killing Earth, humans, and the 8 million species? We have a resounding 91% says no. And we have a few of the pro-nuclear industry here claiming that they can. But they have no evidence to back up their assertions. I have a lot of evidence to back up my assertions. And that's amazing, 50 plus votes on it already. U.S. and Iran in the ballpark, a possible nuclear deal. That's the Times of Israel. That's the only reason they made the screen capture. Because Israel don't make concessions. They're the fourth biggest producer of weapons on the planet. Attorney working on trial date for nuclear bailout bribery case. Remember that? Somebody in a grey shirt there. Attorneys in nuclear bailout bribery scandal have the next 30 days to come to an agreement on the official start date. Householder and Borgs, which is a lobbyist, a nuclear lobbyist. Householder was a Senate congressman, wasn't he? Have both pleaded not guilty to racketeering charges. Right? Because they done the same thing to take down Rocky Flats, right? Where they went in and charged them, the FBI went in there and charged them with racketeering. They done the same thing with this. Householder was getting who knows how much really money and hiring and promoting people in positions for the funding for nuclear, to locate money to nuclear. The case accuses Householder of passing a nuclear power plant bailout of $1 billion in exchange for money from First Energy, who was going to receive the money, and did, to be used for personal political gains. And Borgs, a former lobbyist for First Energy, is accused of offering a bribe to keep the law in place. Nuclear waste management market to expand? Yeah, really? Wow, who would have thought that? Russia revisits expectations on clinching Iran nuclear deal. The boogeyman, Russia, the boogeyman. So is Putin a dictator or not? Nobody else is allowed to run Russian until Putin says so. Look at this one here. Isn't this crazy? Taiwan found more Fukushima food in their country smuggled in. Because Japan's such a trustworthy country, right? That's crazy. Councillor collared the government for failing to uphold the ban and addresses dubious Japanese imports. South Korea had to ship back 6 million pounds of radioactive fish in 2012, for goodness sakes. A milestone towards nuclear fusion energy. Yeah, 100 trillionth of a second. In the long trek, a viable energy source for humankind when there will be just a few thousand left. WV, which how's the fast track? We already covered this in many different Senate approved bill lifting state restrictions on nuclear power plant construction. West Virginia House of Delegates has fast-tracked the bill already approved by the Senate. So nuclear industry just puts people into positions of authority, and that's how they get their way. Nearly 150 officials on the task force exploring nuclear sub-options, government officials. 150 lapdogs, bootlickers, and cheerleaders from a range of federal departments and 10 contractors who the Defense Department has declined to name. And if you got nothing to hide, why are you hiding? Volg expansion tracks. There goes my Geiger counter. Battery just flatlined. The delayed Vogel expansion on track for 2022 start. This is a 2,400 megawatt, 2.4 gigawatt plant is located on the Savannah River. And the Savannah River has been incredibly contaminated by the nuclear industry. It just really highlights how evil the industry actually is. During hot functioning tests, because these run on incredible heats, they achieve normal operating pressure. And they run that from 1,000 to 2,200 psi. And as the neutron bombardment makes them brittle, they start to get cracks. And if you get cracks at 1,000 psi, 2,000 psi, probably not going to turn out very good. Kishida and Biden, which is Japan's current puppet and USA's puppet, seek global security and a nuclear-free world in a virtual summit, touching elbow. This disgusting picture, isn't it? Biden don't even know what year it is, for God's sakes. They took part in an 80-minute virtual summit. 80-minute chatting to each other, and now they're cronies, and they're going to be swapping Christmas cards every year from here on out. It is an effort to counter China. You get it? Well, like, China's not going to invade Japan. Japan's too freaking radioactive. Britain to give EDF Sizewell C nuclear project 135 to give them. Did I mention the word give? Give. And here's what it's going to look like, and it's surrounded by farms. What the hell would you build a nuclear power plant in farmland for? Right? Why build a nuclear power plant in a farmland? Why? Just why be so evil is the question. Britain aims to reach net zero. And I showed you the father of net zero earlier, didn't I? Wrong way. Hang on. Where are you, father of net zero? Oh, I gotta. You gotta realize who these people are, though, right? So he's the physicist behind net zero is Miles Allen. Miles Allen. United Nations seized upon that, didn't they? He has other cronies. People before him weren't as nice as he is. Hang on. I have a unique way of explaining that. Where were we? Yeah, Britain aims to reach net zero emissions. Britain's the scariest one when it comes to this stuff, by the way. Stop Sizewell C, because, I mean, it's constantly emitting radiation. Where's it going to land? Well, first it's going to cover all that food. But here are some other climate alarmists from the industry. Global warming author says barcode everybody at birth. Climate change skepticism is a sickness that must be treated, says the professors. Oh yeah, one of my favorite. Humans are plagues, said the plague. Get some! Get some! Get some! Get some! Sorry. Militant environmentalists call for executions and decisive ecological warfare against people that don't go along with them. Oh yes, one of my favorites. Climate alarmists calls for burning down skeptics' homes. Climate alarmists. Hang on. See, global warming is real. It's caused by radioactive fallout. Death threats. Anyone Australian professor, global warming deniers should be sentenced to death. These are not stupid people. They don't. It's not like they don't know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. Over the past 31 years, let me go backwards here. You lost in the show. Oh, right here. The best way to honor downwinders, aka humans and animals, mammals and insects, everybody's a downwinder. Nuclear test codenamed Trinity by the Los Alamos Laboratory. Director was John Robert Oppenheimer, was carried out without the knowledge or consent of approximately 500,000 people within a 150-mile radius of the blast zone. And the blast took place in White Sands, a place sacred to many indigenous communities. An oral history from the time of the detonations tell of how ash fell from the sky like snow for days afterwards, blanketing entire communities, contaminating the crops and drinking water and soil and the livestock grazing sites with toxic radiation. Like, if hot ash just falls for 5 minutes, you need to run like you never ran before. If hot ash falls for days from a nuclear detonation, it's going to be some serious sad times. In the 77 years since the Trinity test, the U.S. government has never recognized the tremendous harm to communities, or Britain, or France, or any other country. And the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act fund provides compensation to individuals who only contracted certain cancers and other serious diseases resulting from the exposure to radiation, released during above-ground nuclear weapons tests or from exposure to radiation in underground uranium mines. It doesn't recognize the full scale of illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. We're getting there. Everyone in New Mexico and the nation should be standing together and ensure the bills are passed, which is 100% correct. And over the past 31 years, the RECA Fund had paid out approximately $2.5 billion to impacted individuals, while the U.S. government spent approximately $50 billion per year to maintain the nuclear arsenal. So $2.5 billion to the victims, $1.5 trillion to the nuclear weapons producers. And as you wonder why your country's broke, right? So $50 billion a year for 31 years is $1.55 trillion. And if you divide that by the money they paid out, you spent 620 times more money on the weapons than you did the victims. And weapons you can't use. You don't need the weapons. Like, if you really feel you got to have something, just make the weapon, but don't put the nuclear bomb in it. What's the point? You're not going to use it. right? And you don't have to worry about security because if you steal it, who cares? There's no weapon there. So stupid. Such a stupid weapons manufacturing industry. It has now destroyed everybody's future. As with other environmental injustices, indigenous communities and communities of colors like hers or his have shouldered the greatest cost of nuclear weapon development, from uranium mining and nuclear testing. Navajo natives, which is not their actual indigenous name, just the Americans call them that, the industry call them that, have around 15,000 abandoned uranium mines. And those who believe the Trinity test was a necessary cost to safeguard our national security. So each of these lines are 2 or more radioactive clouds. So they radiate the whole country because they were worried Russia or the USSR or China was going to do it to them. That's the logic you're dealing with when you're talking about nuclear industry. They're gutless, spineless souls, eh? We're losing 1 billion birds a year. And I've done the research expeditions each year now, since Fukushima almost. And we see no birds. It's an extinction event. And since November, I've been going out in the woods whenever I can and looking for birds, and I counted 7. We've seen 2 of them at the one time recently. UK invests 135 million EDF's nuclear plant. So that's got a lot of traction, didn't it? That story shows up everywhere. And as I showed you earlier, these places are surrounded by farmlands, right up to the reactors. LED lighting fixtures for nuclear power market. Right, so there's a lot goes on. There's so many facets to nuclear. There's around 1 million corporations dependent upon it. You know, there's also the stock market, the mining companies, and they'll cut your throat. They'll cut your throat. They'll rape the whole planet to get their uranium. Russia has record-breaking nuclear submarine to be armed with Putin's super weapon. Can wreak havoc on the West. Like, that's ultimate fear-mongering, see? 14,700-ton war machine. It was like 26 million pounds or something. Big, stupid. You can't use the weapons. What's the point? It's not a deterrent. You can't use the weapons anyway. And so if you blow up a nuclear weapon underwater, it creates a radioactive cloud of water, of sulfur peroxide, hydrogen, buckyballs that are vicious high radiation. We know this from all the weapons testing. Malaysia, a nuclear medicine market. Poor Malaysia, what they ever do to anybody? Researchers achieve a milestone in the path toward nuclear fusion energy. Latest tweet by scumbag writers. Major construction milestone for Hinkley Point. Look at the apocalyptic cloud. But look at the carbon-free site they got there. Isn't that carbon-free? That's amazing. They got all the best metal on the planet. All the precious metals on the planet. Permission has been granted the Office for Nuclear Regulation to start a bulk mechanical, electrical, and heating, ventilation, air conditioning component installation work at Hinkley Point. Up to 4,000 people. So that they can build this disgusting facility in the center of farmland and poison everybody for 100 years. It's disgusting. How can you build a nuclear plant in farmland? How do you get that evil? How do you get that twisted? How does that actually work? Oh yeah, Facebook and Microsoft's big moves tells us about the metaverse. Facebook changed its name, right? $68 billion purchase of Call of Duty, which is a video game. That's significant, right? Because the military created that. And so they want everybody to live in this fantasy world, because the real world, you won't be able to go outdoors pretty soon. Facebook recently renamed itself Meta Platforms, which is like wearing 3D goggles your whole day. It's incredible. Who was Anne Frank, and why her legacy is still fought over today? She's a propaganda machine who looks like a Palestinian, but is actually an Israeli. Researchers achieve a milestone on the path towards nuclear fusion energy and more. Researchers achieve a milestone on the path towards nuclear fusion. But the milestone was this bizarre fantasy that they created energy for 100 trillionth of a second, using 100 million watts. There is such a thing as static electricity, you know. Static electricity is more energy than 100 billionth of a second. I'm sorry, 100 trillionth of a second. All you do is lie, right? That's perpetual lies. Electricity production in Finland delayed again. What else is new? It was supposed to be up and running in 2009. 13 years ago. Watchbar took 42 years, was it, to get it to work? You give them credit though, they're persistent. OKG signs a pink hydrogen supply contract made with fossil fuel free nuclear. But you can't run nuclear without fossil fuel or coal, oil or gas. Nuclear plants don't run on their own power. They have dedicated fossil fuel plants. It's such a, you can see the agenda, right? With all of this, fossil free, and then nuclear. Nuclear is by the way, nuclear is the most carbon intensive thing on the planet, but it's also the most energy intensive, right? It uses up so much energy. It's an absurd amount of energy to make a little bit of hydrogen. And look what they show you for a picture. Nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. There's evil and then there's nuclear. Nuclear is Brookhaven Lab physicist named AAAS fellow. Brookhaven is considered one of the worst neighbors you can ever have. They're in New Jersey, right? And they've got an aquifer underneath them that is incredibly radioactive that feeds fresh water to a lot of New Jersey. They have street after street after street after street full of cancer clusters. But there's 1,800 other illnesses and diseases you get from radiation besides cancer. And so the truth will never be known of how evil this group was. I guess it never ends in the nuclear industry. Chalk River, the site of the world's first known nuclear meltdown, by the way, is working with rare medical radioisotopes to target cancer cells. Like, don't do that to your loved ones. I'll show you what you should do. Hang on here. Go to Amazon.com. And you'll find it. If you're in Canada, you'll see ships to Canada. Like right there, ships to Canada. And that killed all cancer. It reduced all tumors. Big, hard tumors were squeezing your organs. It reduced all of them by 70% in the first 3 weeks, which means you don't need invasive surgery and your cancer is going. And it does that by causing your blood to plate, so it's really good for all kinds of other things. It's just a mineral. DCA, if you put it in on Amazon.com, you'll get all kinds of different. Now, this purity is 99.9%. I would go for the pure stuff. You'll find it there if you're looking for it. There it is, there, pure DCA. And if you're in the United States, you can just go down to any pharmacy with a compound chemist. They can make it right there. But studies were showed it killed every cancer that you threw at it. Chalk River will kill you. That's what Chalk River does for a living. And Chalk River is not even Canada. Even though they call it the Canadian National Laboratory, it's not. This is an American run. America runs that. Faster goal zero emissions should be in the state climate plan, public says. Faster goal zero emissions. The public says, yeah. The public is irrelevant. It's just these handful of industries, corporations, and whatever they feel like, you got to put up with it. If you want to poison everybody, you got no say in it. As long as they make their bonus each year, you got no say in it. A carbon neutral future by 2050. And remember, BP Oil is the one who had a large campaign, advertising campaign, and started the carbon footprint nonsense. They focus on more quickly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Well, it's not greenhouse gas; it's radioactive fallout that you gotta stop. No carbon capture is radioactive fallout capture. Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming. It pulses energy every second, invisible clouds. It's still hemorrhaging out of these nuclear power plants. Sizewell see funding huge stride towards low carbons. Time to take India, France ties to the next level, because France right now is the head of the EU, right, for the next 6 months, 5 months. And they're like the worst people you can put in that position, by the way. And UN Watch, a Geneva-based activist group that are so petty, they talked about, they were quoted multiple media outlets during December and January. Just because the industry puts you on a pedestal don't mean you're right. And they want North Korea to have no role in the disarmament talks. Sundance Film Review, Speak No Evil. That's the nuclear industry, right? Speak no evil. That's you in the car. European security order on the brink. The Russian crisis. What's next? Nobody's going to attack Ukraine. 15 nuclear power plants over there. They really think they're going to attack that? It's pure fear-mongering, right? Light therapy fast tracks healing of skin damage from cancer radiation therapy. So this radiation therapy, if you got a tumor anywhere in your torso, in your body, they'll pound you with radiation and they'll probably kill it. And then next year you'll have tumors everywhere else. It destroys all your organs, anywhere near your head. You'd have a brain necrosis. Nuclear therapy is a nuclear genocide machine. There is no nuclear therapy. And I've done entire presentations of academic studies on the subject. I can assure you. Icebreakers, some of the toughest ships in the world. Yeah? They are, really. They're pretty amazing, going through 21 feet thick ice. Russia got some of them up there around the ocean floor with their reactor cores. Like the Lenin, they threw the reactor core overboard in the Arctic Sea of all places. Oh yeah, Polish nuclear research reactor put into operation in emergency for isotopes they use to murder you with? Or is that... yeah, that's to make technetium-99. Now, I mean, they instead of using a better system, they use nuclear for most things. Any way they can get nuclear embedded in your life, Like if they used to make nuclear or radioactive toothpaste and radioactive makeup and give it to little girls who would end up with big holes in their faces and die from major tumors and lose their lower jaws. They used to have radioactive suppositories. Try wrapping your mind around that one. I'm a nuclear proctologist, I still can't. They used to have radioactive vases. And what they want you to do is fill it up with water, let it sit for a few hours till it was really radioactive, and then drink that. All of that was approved by doctors and physicists and everything else. Oh, yeah, no, you'll be fine. And it would rot your head right off your shoulder and kill you. Securing nuclear waste. I think that's the last story of the night. Yeah, that's the last story. Securing nuclear waste, how to warn the future generation of the danger. So that was the 24-hour news cycle. Well, there's no way to guarantee that they're going to find. So say we're all gone and another generation comes through and the nuclear waste, they accidentally dig down and hit the nuclear waste. They're probably, the nuclear industry, knowing the nuclear industry, they're going to put a sign saying, dig here. If you're the last humans on Earth, dig right here. They got no intentions of letting anybody or any species survive. Yay, we made it to the end of the show. It was a long show, was it? Yeah, a little bit. But that's 24-hour news cycle. And the last half of it was just headlines. Because you can't cover it all, see? Well, I could, but it's going to take 7 or 8 hours. It takes 10 hours to dig everything up today. Well, it was also a couple hours last night after the show, but who counts anymore? And so if I try to cover every story and every lie, you're looking at 6, 7, 8 hour show. Might as well do everything in real time, right? Rather than spend 10 hours digging everything up, you might as well just sit there, instead of sitting at home on the couch or the chair doing the work, gathering up all this information. It'd be better just to sit here in the studio, bring up the screen here and just highlight everything, and then I don't have to do the show later. So when I'm doing the research, I should do my programs, instead of doing condensed shows like this, I should just, all my research should be done live, because then the day's over, right? So instead of waiting, like usually I finish up a half an hour before the show starts, and then it's game on, right? Do the show, the presentation, and then go start again. Just wipe the board clean, because you got to get up and do it all again. It never stops, right? But today's was the 24-hour news cycle. So what I do is I grab everything, I sweep in from the ULR, throw it into a folder, and then refresh everything, start up a new session, and then throw each headline onto the browser, and then it'll expand, right? And then I go through it. So I gather up all the stories first. It was 160 stories today. And I read everything. There's nothing I don't read. Anyway, Atoms for Peace, the A-10 Warthog going to shoot depleted uranium munitions. Let's call it a night. Say goodnight to everybody. Let's call the poll down first. How did we do at the poll? Where's the poll? There we go. Can nuclear power plants exist without killing Earth, humans, and the 8 million species? Shockingly, we got 8% says it can, which is absurd, and a positive 92% of 59 votes. Wow. That says no, nuclear can't exist without exterminating all the species. Which is pretty amazing. I'll wait a few minutes. Hopefully we get 60 votes. We'll end it on 60 votes. So I'll do a quick shout out to everybody while we wait to see if there's anybody that can give us another vote. Yeah, live research with Dana. That'll be hell. I get pretty cranky when I'm doing the research because I'm reading it for the first time. I'm actually miserable for that 10 hours. Don Vincent, Ed M. Let me go back in here and set up the. Just give me 1 second. It was Thursday's last show of the week. We missed Sunday's show. I was burnt out under a lot of stress. I had a quad breakdown on us. Still broken down, and we got to raise money to get that fixed. I don't even care anymore. I would rather be. I should have been out there today doing research, but you can only do what you can do, right? We're bankrupt at this stage, and unless the world, people out there find a way, I can only do what I can do on my side. Port Angeles, James Lucet. Good night, everybody. Albert, Peaceware, Ed M. Ed M. Thinker, Andrew B, which is CFINSTR. Katja, Chet Austin, Warren. Maybe lots of people here tonight. Wow. I see Dana and the Sound at night. We probably slept through this tonight. He's doing a bang-up job on moderating lately. I noticed it's a lot of work, eh? I think it wears you out. It wears me out. The equipment I'm running, it takes typically 5 people to work the equipment, and so I have to do everything myself. I hate technology with a passion, eh? And there's no shortcuts with technology. Is the problem. You got to learn how to use it, and it doesn't give up the ghost very easy. Just scrolling down through the names quickly. I'm looking for anybody I didn't give a quick shout out to. Shout out for everybody at home. Hugs for everybody that came by and visited. It's appreciated. Bless you for caring. Robert, we had a lot of comments tonight. I'll read everything after. I'm just scrolling quickly down through the names. We're almost down to the bottom, to the most recent comments. And I'm going to end the poll in a second here. Wendy Cakes. And anybody I missed, my apologies. Sacramento Lynn. And I know Colette is usually out there. Yeah, hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Oh, let's end the poll. We got 60 votes on the poll. Ha 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 ha. End that. Wee doggy. I feel better. Remember, folks, there's a link under my video on the very bottom of the description. There's 2 ways you can donate. Both of them are directly to me. If you're in a position where you can donate to me, now's a pretty good time. We got to get that quad back out in the woods and look for species. We're missing prime time right now. I'm tempted to go out. It still runs, but it doesn't. You can't reactive or throttle, she'll bog out on you. And what am I going to do? It's minus 18 tomorrow morning. I get out there and it breaks down, minus 18. I'm in trouble. It's crazy to be out there anyway, see? It's got to be done, though. We're looking at an extinction event. Okay, good night then, everybody. Blue Jay Outposts. Looks like I got everybody cut the live show tonight. See everybody on Sunday night, unless we got breaking news coming. I'll be busy. You know me, it never stops for me. But you folks should take a couple days off and enjoy yourselves. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody. We see everybody on Sunday's show, same time. Take care, folks.